They underestimated her from day one. Too clean. Too kind. Captain Rachel Angel Martinez stood beside her UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter at Forward Operating Base Liberty in Afghanistan. Her flight suit pressed and spotless, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had never seen combat. To the hard-bitten infantry soldiers loading equipment into her aircraft, she looked like someone who had stepped out of a recruiting poster. A pretty face the Air Force used to make military service look appealing to college graduates who had never heard a shot fired in anger. At 28, Rachel spoke softly and smiled easily, treating ground forces with a courtesy that many interpreted as weakness. She said please and thank you to sergeants who were used to being ordered around, asked about their families during pre-flight briefings, and showed a level of concern for passenger comfort that seemed out of place in a combat zone. She was too clean, too kind, too obviously from a world where problems were solved with words rather than bullets. But when the 12-man reconnaissance team she was supporting got pinned down by overwhelming enemy fire in a valley 60 kilometers from base, when their planned extraction zone was overrun and their backup landing site was compromised, everything changed. The radio crackled with desperate calls for immediate evacuation as wounded soldiers fought for their lives against superior numbers, and the ground commander was preparing to abort the mission when Rachel's voice cut through the chaos. She picked up the radio, took the lead, and announced her intention to fly straight into the fire. For 47 minutes, Captain Martinez performed flying that defied every safety regulation and tactical procedure in the book, extracting the entire team from a situation that should have been impossible to survive. By the time they made it back to base, bleeding and exhausted but alive, no one who had witnessed her performance ever doubted her again. Welcome to the Silent Salute. Before we continue with this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. Your support means everything to us, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please hit that subscribe button. We're growing every day, and every single one of you makes that possible. Thank you for being part of our community. Forward Operating Base Liberty in eastern Afghanistan was a rough, utilitarian installation that housed more than 2,000 American and coalition troops conducting counterinsurgency operations along the volatile border with Pakistan. The base served as a staging area for reconnaissance missions, direct action raids, and the countless smaller operations that made up the daily rhythm of the War on Terror. Captain Rachel Martinez had arrived at FOB Liberty 3 months earlier as part of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the elite Night Stalkers unit that provided helicopter support for the most dangerous and sensitive military missions. Her assignment was to fly medical evacuation and personnel transport missions throughout the region, supporting ground forces with the kind of precision flying that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe. Rachel's background was atypical for a military aviator. She had grown up in a small town in Nebraska, the daughter of high school teachers who had emphasized education and community service over military traditions. She had earned a degree in engineering from the University of Nebraska before joining the Army through officer candidate school, drawn to military aviation by the technical challenges and the opportunity to serve others in meaningful ways. Her path to the cockpit had been smooth, perhaps too smooth for a community that valued hard-earned experience over academic credentials. Rachel had excelled in flight school, graduating near the top of her class and earning assignment to the 160th based on her technical proficiency and leadership potential. But her clean record and obvious intelligence had actually worked against her credibility with ground forces who were more impressed by combat experience than test scores. The soldiers at FOB Liberty had developed their own informal assessment of Rachel's capabilities based on observation of her first few weeks of operations. She flew scheduled logistics missions with textbook precision, maintained her aircraft to manufacturer specifications, and conducted pre-flight briefings that covered every detail of weather, terrain, and tactical considerations. She was competent and professional, but she had yet to face the kind of emergency that would reveal whether her training could translate into performance under extreme pressure. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, a veteran infantryman with 3 combat deployments, had summed up the prevailing opinion after riding on one of Rachel's routine supply runs. "She's a good pilot," he had told his squad. "Safe, careful, by the book. But she's never been tested. When the shooting starts and everything goes wrong, we'll see what she's really made of. The mission that would provide that test began as a routine reconnaissance operation designed to gather intelligence on enemy movements in the Karangal Valley, a notorious stronghold of Taliban activity where American forces had been fighting for years. A 12-man team from the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment was tasked with conducting a 3-day surveillance mission from hidden observation posts overlooking key infiltration routes. The team was led by Captain David Thompson, a West Point graduate who had already completed 2 combat deployments and earned a reputation as one of the most competent young officers in the battalion. His men were experienced Rangers who had participated in dozens of similar missions, and the intelligence picture suggested that enemy activity in their area of operations was relatively light. Rachel's role in the mission was straightforward. Insert the reconnaissance team at their initial infiltration point, conduct scheduled resupply flights if needed, and extract the team at the conclusion of their surveillance period. It was exactly the kind of mission that the 160th conducted routinely throughout Afghanistan, requiring competent flying but not the advanced tactics that define the unit's most dangerous operations. The insertion went perfectly, with Rachel delivering the Rangers to their landing zone at 0230 hours under cover of darkness and departing without incident. For the next 36 hours, the mission proceeded according to plan, with the reconnaissance team gathering valuable intelligence on enemy movements while remaining undetected in their concealed positions. But on the second night of the mission, everything went wrong with devastating speed. The Rangers had identified a large enemy force moving through the valley, more than 200 Taliban fighters with heavy weapons and sophisticated communication equipment. Captain Thompson had called in his observations and was preparing to relocate to an alternate observation post when his team was discovered by an enemy patrol that had been specifically tasked with finding and eliminating American surveillance teams. The firefight that erupted was intense and immediate, with the 12 Rangers fighting against overwhelming odds while attempting to break contact and reach their planned extraction zone. But enemy forces had anticipated the American tactical response and had positioned blocking forces along all the obvious escape routes. Liberty Base, this is Recon 6. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio at 0347 hours. We are in contact with approximately 50 enemy fighters and taking heavy casualties. We need immediate extraction from primary LZ. The response from the Base Operations Center was swift but discouraging. Recon 6, be advised that primary LZ is compromised. Enemy forces have heavy weapons positioned to cover the landing zone. Recommend you move to alternate extraction site. But when Thompson attempted to reach the backup landing zone, he found that enemy forces had anticipated that move as well. His team was effectively surrounded, taking fire from multiple directions while carrying 2 seriously wounded Rangers who couldn't move quickly enough to break contact with pursuing forces. Liberty Base, alternate LZ, is also compromised, Thompson reported, his voice strained with the effort of coordinating his team's movement while under fire. We are trapped in Sector 77 with wounded personnel. Need immediate close air support and emergency extraction. That's when Rachel Martinez, who had been monitoring the radio traffic from her position at the base, made the decision that would define her military career and save 12 lives. She had been scheduled to fly a routine logistics mission that morning, but she immediately began preparing her aircraft for an emergency extraction that every regulation and tactical manual said was impossible to conduct safely. The proposed extraction site was completely exposed to enemy fire, surrounded by terrain that made approach and departure extremely dangerous, and defended by forces with weapons capable of destroying her helicopter. Liberty Base, this is Angel Flight, Rachel called over the radio, using her operational call sign as she started her helicopter's engines. I'm launching for immediate extraction of Recon 6. Request you coordinate supporting fires and clear all air traffic from Sector 77. The response from the Operations Center was immediate and negative. Angel Flight, abort launch. The tactical situation does not permit safe extraction operations. Recon 6 will have to move to a more secure landing zone. But Rachel was already taxiing toward the runway, her aircraft loaded with medical supplies and configured for combat operations. Liberty Base, Recon 6 doesn't have time to reach a secure LZ. They have wounded personnel and are surrounded by superior enemy forces. I'm going to get them out. Colonel James Morrison, the base commander, came on the radio personally to countermand Rachel's decision. Angel Flight, this is Liberty 6. You are ordered to abort this mission. The risks are unacceptable, and we cannot afford to lose a helicopter crew attempting an impossible extraction. Rachel's response was calm and professional, but absolutely unmistakable in its determination. Liberty 6, I understand the risks. But those Rangers are going to die if someone doesn't go get them. I'm the only pilot available, and I'm going. She switched her radio to the frequency being used by Thompson's team, cutting off further argument from the base operations center. Recon 6, this is Angel Flight. I'm inbound to your location for immediate extraction. Give me your best estimate of enemy positions and wounded status. Thompson's relief was audible despite the sound of gunfire in the background. Angel Flight, we have 2 urgent surgical and 1 priority medical. Enemy forces are positioned north, west, and south of our location with heavy machine guns and RPGs. The only safe approach is from the east, but that requires you to fly through a narrow canyon that's probably covered by enemy observation. Rachel was already airborne and heading toward the Kringle Valley, her aircraft flying at maximum speed through terrain that challenged even the most experienced pilots. Recon 6, I'll be at your location in 12 minutes. Start moving your wounded toward the best available landing site and prepare for immediate departure. What happened over the next 47 minutes became legendary within the Special Operations Aviation community, a display of flying skill, tactical awareness, and personal courage that redefined what was considered possible under combat conditions. Rachel's approach to the extraction site required her to fly through a canyon that was barely wider than her rotor span, navigating by terrain features while maintaining radio contact with Thompson's team and coordinating with base operations for supporting fires. Enemy forces had identified her aircraft and were maneuvering to engage her with every weapon they possessed. Angel Flight, be advised you have enemy personnel with shoulder-fired missiles positioned on the ridge lines, Thompson warned as Rachel entered the canyon. They're tracking your approach and will engage as soon as you reach the extraction site. Rachel's response was characteristic, calm, professional, and focused entirely on mission completion. Copy, Recon 6. I'll deal with the missiles when they fire. You just get your wounded ready for pickup. The first surface-to-air missile was fired when Rachel was still 3 kilometers from the extraction site, forcing her to conduct violent evasive maneuvers that should have resulted in a crash in the confined terrain of the canyon. But Rachel's flying was precise and intuitive, using every feature of the landscape to mask her approach while maintaining the speed and altitude necessary for survival. The second missile forced her into maneuvers that exceeded the design limitations of her aircraft, pulling G-forces that strained both the helicopter and its pilot beyond normal safety margins. But Rachel continued her approach, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to defeat the enemy's targeting systems while closing the distance to Thompson's position. When Rachel finally reached the extraction site, she found a landing zone that was completely exposed to enemy fire from 3 directions, with wounded Rangers who needed immediate medical attention and healthy soldiers who were running low on ammunition. The tactical situation was exactly as impossible as everyone had predicted, but Rachel didn't hesitate. She brought her helicopter into a hover directly over Thompson's position, presenting an unmistakable target for every enemy weapon within range while her crew chief and medic jumped out to help load the wounded Rangers. For 8 minutes, an eternity under those conditions, Rachel held her aircraft steady despite taking fire from multiple sources, allowing her crew to provide emergency medical treatment and load all 12 Rangers aboard. But the extraction was only the beginning of Rachel's extraordinary performance. Getting out of the valley required her to fly the same dangerous route in reverse, now with a heavily loaded aircraft and wounded passengers who needed immediate medical attention. Enemy forces had repositioned during the extraction and were waiting with concentrated fire along every possible escape route. Rachel chose the most direct path, straight up the center of the canyon, while enemy fighters engaged her with everything they had. For 23 minutes, she flew through sustained fire while her crew chief provided updates on the condition of the wounded Rangers, and her co-pilot coordinated with base operations for medical support upon landing. Angel Flight, you're taking hits, Her co-pilot reported as enemy rounds impacted the aircraft's fuselage. "We've got warning lights across the board, and we're losing hydraulic pressure." Rachel's response was to increase airspeed and continue her aggressive maneuvering, refusing to allow mechanical problems to slow their escape from the valley. "Copy. We'll deal with the aircraft damage when we get these Rangers to medical care." "How are the wounded?" The crew chief's report was grim but stable. "We've got 2 Rangers who need immediate surgery and one who's lost a lot of blood. They're stable for now, but they need to be in an operating room within 30 minutes. Rachel pushed her damaged helicopter beyond its normal performance envelope, flying at speeds and altitudes that should have been impossible given the extent of battle damage her aircraft had sustained. When she finally reached FOB Liberty and landed at the medical facility, her helicopter was barely flyable and her fuel was nearly exhausted. But all 12 Rangers were alive, and the 2 most seriously wounded were in surgery within 7 minutes of landing, fast enough to save their lives and preserve their ability to return to duty. The after-action review of Rachel's performance was conducted by Colonel Morrison and included testimony from every member of Thompson's team. The Rangers were unanimous in their assessment that Rachel's flying had saved their lives and that no other pilot could have accomplished what she had done under those conditions. "Sir," Thompson told Colonel Morrison during the formal debrief, "Captain Martinez didn't just extract my team. She performed flying that I didn't think was possible. She took a helicopter into terrain and tactical situations that should have resulted in the loss of aircraft and crew, and she brought all of us home alive." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the same soldier who had questioned Rachel's combat capabilities, was even more direct in his assessment. "Sir, I was wrong about Captain Martinez. Dead wrong. What she did today was the most courageous thing I've ever seen. She risked everything to save soldiers she barely knew, and she did it with flying skills that I didn't know existed." The formal recognition for Rachel's actions came in the form of the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the highest decorations for aerial achievement. But the real recognition came from the transformation in how she was viewed by the ground forces she supported. Within days of the extraction, Rachel found herself being specifically requested for the most dangerous and difficult missions. Rangers, Special Forces, and other elite units wanted her as their pilot because they had seen what she could do when everything went wrong and lives were on the line. But perhaps more importantly, Rachel's performance had shattered assumptions about what female aviators could accomplish in combat roles. She had proven that courage, skill, and determination weren't limited by gender or background, and that the ability to perform under extreme pressure was a function of character rather than appearances. 6 months after the extraction in the Karengal Valley, Rachel was promoted to major and assigned as a flight leader with the 160th's most elite unit, responsible for supporting the most sensitive special operations missions throughout the theater. Her reputation as a pilot who could accomplish impossible missions had spread throughout the special operations community, and she was regularly called upon for operations that required the highest levels of skill and courage. The helicopter that Rachel had flown during the extraction was eventually repaired and returned to service, but not before her crew chief had painted 12 small stars on the fuselage, one for each Ranger whose life had been saved by her extraordinary flying. The aircraft became known throughout the unit as Angel's Ride, and flying it was considered an honor reserved for the most accomplished pilots. But Rachel's real legacy was measured in the lives she saved and the barriers she broke. Her performance had proven that excellence in combat aviation was about competence and courage rather than stereotypes and assumptions. She had shown that the quiet, polite officer who said please and thank you could also be the warrior who flew straight into hell to bring soldiers home safely. Looking back on that morning in the Karengal Valley, Rachel realized that the extraction had been a turning point not just for her career, but for her understanding of what it meant to serve others in the most dangerous circumstances. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about commanding respect through intimidation or aggression. It was about earning respect through performance when performance mattered most. The soldiers who had initially doubted her capabilities became her strongest advocates, spreading stories of her flying throughout the special operations community and ensuring that her reputation opened doors for other female aviators who faced similar skepticism about their abilities. 10 years after the extraction, Rachel was a lieutenant colonel commanding her own aviation unit, responsible for training the next generation of special operations pilots. Her office was decorated with photographs from successful missions and letters from grateful soldiers, but the place of honor was reserved for a group photo taken at FOB Liberty, showing her crew and the 12 Rangers whose lives she had saved, all of them smiling despite their bandages and obvious exhaustion. The photo served as a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against enemy forces, but against assumptions and prejudices that limit what people believe is possible. Rachel had won both battles that day in the Karingal Valley, defeating enemy fighters who were trying to kill American soldiers, and defeating stereotypes that suggested she wasn't capable of performing at the highest levels of military aviation. The young captain who had been dismissed as too clean and too kind had proven that kindness and competence weren't mutually exclusive, and that the most effective warriors were often those who combined technical excellence with genuine concern for the people they served. Her soft-spoken manner and polite demeanor hadn't been weaknesses to overcome. They had been strengths that enabled her to communicate effectively under pressure and to maintain the clarity of thought necessary for split-second decision-making in life-or-death situations. Sometimes courage doesn't look like what we expect. Sometimes it comes from quiet people who speak softly but act decisively when action is needed. Sometimes the person who seems least likely to fly into hell is exactly the person who will do it without hesitation when lives are on the line. Rachel Martinez had looked like someone who belonged in a recruiting poster rather than a combat zone, but appearances had been deceiving in the most important way possible. Behind the clean uniform and polite manner was a warrior who would risk everything for people she barely knew, who would push herself and her aircraft beyond all reasonable limits to bring soldiers home safely. The Rangers who had doubted her capabilities learned that day that heroism comes in many forms, and that the most dangerous underestimation is assuming that someone can't perform under pressure simply because they don't fit traditional expectations of what a warrior should look like. This story was brought to you by the Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever witnessed someone completely exceed expectations in a moment of crisis? Have you seen someone who was underestimated or dismissed prove their worth when it mattered most? Tell us in the comments about the times when someone surprised you with their courage, competence, or determination, when their actions revealed capabilities that no one had recognized or appreciated. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, if you believe that we should look beyond appearances and assumptions to recognize the potential for heroism in unexpected places, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one, where we'll continue to share the stories of extraordinary people who remind us that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most capable warriors are the ones who look least like what we expect warriors to be.